I have to take a breath sometimes before I start a joke, right? Some of you know this. But so there's a group of men that are at the gym, and all of a sudden, one of the phones starts to ring, and one of the men actually pick it up and says, yes. And the voice on the other says, honey, is that you? I can hardly hear you. And he says, hello? Are you at the gym? And the guy says, yes, we're at the gym. And she's like, oh, okay, well, listen, it's just really quick. I'm in front of a store, and they have an amazing mink coat. Can I buy it? It was over that limit that most couples have where you have to ask the other person, right? He's like, and the man says, oh, well, how much is it? She's like, well, it's $5,000. She's like, well, go ahead and actually buy yourself a matching purse with that. Why don't you? And so the wife is like, whoa, okay, this is a much better conversation than I was expecting. So she decides to push it a little bit. She's like, you know, I was actually seeing that at the car dealership, they only have one of the BMWs that I really, really wanted. There's only one left. What do you think about that? Do you think I can go ahead and purchase it? She's like, well, how much is that? It's like $70,000. The man says. He goes, why don't you buy it? And why don't you actually make sure that it has all the accessories that you want? So the woman's like really excited and goes, you know what? I'm going to go all for it. Says, you know, honey, my mom's really wanting us to have her move in with us and live with us. I know we've talked about this before, but it feels like you're in a space where this might be a possibility. And the man says, you know what? Let her move in with us. That's no problem. But let this be the last thing you ask of me today. She's like, oh, yes, of course. I love you so much. I love you so much. And as soon as they hang up, the man turns to the other people at the gym and says, does anyone know whose phone this is? But think about this truth. Isn't it so much easier to be generous with somebody else's stuff? Right? Like you look out and you're like, oh, of course that person should give more money. Of course that person should be doing this, right? But when it's our stuff, sometimes it gets a little bit more difficult to be generous. Is that true for anyone else but me? Okay, good. Well, guess what? If we really think about it, none of our things are our things. None of our money is our money. None of our time is our time. If it were, we'd be able to hoard it and have it for the rest of not only our lives, but continue on, right? Owning it. But the reality is that we are borrowing it, and they have been really entrusted to us. And how more powerful could it be if we realize this truth? That it isn't fully ours, that it is something that has been entrusted to us. Could we then be more generous with it? Where we don't have to feel like it's ours, so we have to hoard it. But it's been given to us. We are in the flow of it, and we can continue to be in the flow of it and be generous with it. In truth, it's been entrusted to us by God, the universe, our highest self, and it's part of that energy. It's the substance. In unity, we call that substance. Everything is made up of this invisible energy of God called substance. And we can tap into it, and we can create out of it, and we can manifest out of it. And it's not our energy. It's the energy of the universe. It's the energy of God that we can play with. The moment that we can realize that what we have is an expression of that, maybe we can move into a greater sense of generosity with ourselves and with others. And so as we enter this Thanksgiving season, it's a really perfect time for us to be thinking about the power of generosity in our own lives. Now, I know gratitude is usually the theme, and it is the theme of the month when we talk about Thanksgiving, and gratitude and generosity actually go hand in hand. They are part of the same coin. They're different sides of the same coin. Now, gratitude is something that we have to cultivate, right? How many of you have practiced the art of gratitude and cultivating gratitude in our lives? And so it's a practice. It's something that we do. It's something that we put into practice so that we can experience more of it. And generosity is one of the ways in which that practices becomes real for us. It is the way in which all of a sudden we can be part of that flow of the God energy, of the substance energy, of the good that is in our lives. And so being grateful is allowing ourselves to be generous. And if you think about it, we can be grateful for the generosity that has been shown to us. We can also be grateful for the fact that we can be generous with what has been given to us. And if you've looked back on times where you have allowed yourself to be generous in a deep and impactful way, you know that it brings about gratitude within your heart, right? And so each of those can really support each other. And it's about really trusting that generosity can not only be life-affirming, but it can be life-altering. And it really can be, well, addictive, right? Like the more that we practice generosity, the more that we want to experience all of the blessing that comes from simply opening ourselves up to being in the flow, to allowing that substance that has been allowed into our lives, that we have allowed into our lives, and that we have been entrusted with, to allow it to move from us to bless others, to bless life itself. Now, the Bible is full of examples about the power of generosity. Throughout the Bible, we are told that God is very generous with us. And throughout the Bible, we get told how being generous with God or generous with others is being generous with God. For example, on 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 11, it says, "You will be enriched in every way for your great generosity." From Proverbs 11, 24 through 25, "Some give freely, yet grow all the richer. Others withhold what is due and only suffer want. A generous person will be enriched. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Some who give freely grow all the richer. Those who hoard will always want." And if we think about hoarding, right, it is that idea of consumerism that doesn't have enough, that isn't enough. But when we are able to give freely, it is an example of us saying that we trust the universe, that we trust God to provide for us what is for us. Now, giving freely grows richer is scientifically proven. Did you know that? In the year 2000, there was an economist named Arthur Brooks who did a test, and he actually was able to show that the people that gave more, financially, in this case, the people who gave more ended up making more. And the people that were more generous with their money ended up going further with their money and being provided opportunities that made their wealth grow more. And so you can listen to the Bible, or you can listen to an economist. There is power in us being able to be generous and allowing ourselves to be in the flow of that. So if you want to experience prosperity, we have to learn to share our prosperity with others. Now, we can't wait to have enough. How many of you are tired of waiting to just have enough or to just be enough? We can realize that in order for us to have and be enough, generosity is actually one of the practices and one of the pathways to get us to recognize that truth, that we are enough, that we have enough, that God will always provide, that the universe is always working in our favor. And so it's not about waiting anymore. It's just about simply putting it into practice to realize that we cannot become ready. We have to just simply act as if we are. Now, if you want to practice generosity to receive more, like Arthur Brooks tells you that you can, go all for it. If your reasons for being generous is that you think that you can acquire more as a result, good for you, because you're going to put it into practice and you'll recognize that not only will that be true, but there are other truths and other blessings that come up. How many of you are looking to welcome a greater sense of prosperity and abundance in your life? Yeah. How many of you could experience a greater sense of being in the flow of good in your life? Good, we're in the right place, right? If we want to tap into that space of possibilities, that space of pure potentiality, we have to be willing to let go of anything that is limiting, anything that is lacking, anything that brings us to think that there is such a thing as scarcity, and be allowing ourselves to flow with the good that already is, with the generosity that is an expression of God. See, lack and limitation are not just thoughts that we hold, they are the blocks that we have set up for ourselves to not experience that greater good. And so if there is anything in our lives where we want to experience more of God, we have to really move beyond those lack and limiting thoughts, that idea, that belief in scarcity. Because when it blocks it, it becomes true. We are limited. When we block it, we are lacking. But the moment that we recognize that it no longer has to be our truth, and that there are practices that we can employ to let go and push through that lack and limiting way of thinking, the more good will come into our lives, the more we will be in the flow of prosperity, wholeness, abundance, joy, peace, all the things that we know God to be. And see, it's really about moving from theory to really like solidly knowing that this is true. And I don't know about you, but I can read about things, I can listen to things, but it's only when I put them into practice that I go into a deeper knowing. And this is an opportunity for us to really go into that inner knowing, that the practice of generosity is what pushes us beyond the I'm not enough, I don't have enough. And it's the way in which we all of a sudden like really move into trust and faith at a really deep level. All of a sudden when we say that doesn't matter how much we have in our bank account. It doesn't matter what sort of experiences we may be moving through, that we can still be in the flow regardless of how the world is seeming in that moment for us. It's the moment that we do that all of a sudden we say, we trust the universe. And all of a sudden the universe says, then you can be trusted with more. Now, that's a very personification of the universe to make a point, because the reality is that for me, the moment that we say we trust the universe, we trust God, we trust good, we trust abundance in our life, we simply just become more open to it. We open our hearts more fully to experiencing it. Now, how many of you, we talked about wanting more abundance and prosperity in our lives, how many of you want to just know God more fully? To experience God more fully. Matthew chapter 6, verse 33 says, "But strive first for the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." And so we get reminded that first and foremost, we are to seek God. We are to seek an understanding of our oneness with God. And I've told you before, sometimes I want to learn about somebody, but in order to fully get to know them, I have to put myself in their shoes, right? Like walk in somebody's shoes, and that's how you get to know somebody, right? You've heard that before? Well, how many times do we give ourselves permission to walk in the shoes of God? So if you believe that God is a generous and giving God, what would it look like for you to walk in the shoes of giving and generosity? I love, it's in Keys to the Kingdom, is one of my favorite prosperity. In order for us to know God more fully, we have to allow ourselves to be the givingness of God. And when we talk about us being one with God, think about what God is to you then, right? So when we just say, I am one with God, what does that mean? What is one thing that you know God to be, for example? Anybody? Loving. Okay, great. So God is love, right? Well, if we are one with God that is love, then it says that we are love. But in order for us to know that more fully, what should we practice? Being loving. The same thing with God being peace. How many of you know God to be peace? The inner peace that we can feel. Well, then we are one with that peace. And in order for us to fully know it and live it and more fully engage with it and embody our truth, that we are one with that, if we really believe it, then how are we to be acting? From peace. The same thing goes with generosity, with abundance. In order for us to really be in the knowing and in the feeling that we are one with the abundance that is God, We have to let go of the thoughts of lack and limitation, and we have to step into abundance, and we have to practice abundance to be able to solidify that belief so that nothing, no matter what circumstances, what the bank account says, what the relationship says, that we can stand firm in our truth. To feel the generosity of life, we have to be generous with life. Have you experienced that before in your life? I have. And it begs the question, if I know that to be true, then how can I continue to grow in my generosity with life, with my generosity with others? Now, Dr. Joe Dispenza, who talks a lot about the quantum field, and again, in Unity, we would see that as the space of pure potentiality, the place where God's substance is. He says that the quantum field responds not to what we want, it responds to who we are being. So how are you being? Are you being generous or are you being limiting? Are you being generous or stingy? Generous or fearful? Prosperity is ours. Generosity is what we can choose to be in this moment to experience that prosperity in greater ways. Now, in the book of Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, there's a story, and many of you probably could remember it. It's the story of this young rich man who goes up to Jesus and says that he's looking for eternal life. Jesus, tell me what to do. How many of you are like, Jesus, just tell me what to do, right? And he got an answer that sometimes we get too, and we're like, I don't know about that, Jesus, right? But when Jesus responds to him, he says, well, you have to sell all your possessions, give all the profits to the poor, and follow me on this way. Everybody take a deep breath. That's a lot to ask. Don't worry, I'm not saying that we should sell all of our possessions, but that man walks away really feeling dejected from that experience because he had a lot of possessions. For me, that story really tells us and really invites us to recognize that sometimes we're holding to our stuff too tightly, and that sometimes we are making God of our stuff, instead of realizing that our stuff is of God. And so all of a sudden, when we have that shift in mentality, that we can be generous, that in order for us to walk the path that Jesus talked to this man about, we have to let go of our need for possessions, and we have to more fully and more greatly give it away. Now, we're told by our consumer culture, right, that we'll be happier when we have more stuff. And we're told by truth that we can be happy here and now. And that in order for us to be happy here and now, there may be some practices that we have to work on to undo those thoughts of lack and limitation, of scarcity, of not enoughness in our lives, in myself, and in the life that is around me. So how about we step more fully into this Christ expression of generosity? How can we move into this path more fully? How many of you are you willing to start to be even more generous with life? I want to see hands, actually. So only if you believe it, though, right? But because there takes a level of commitment. There takes a level of really standing strong in what our beliefs are and in our desire to practice into our beliefs. And so I'm going to invite you to be more generous wherever you're at in generosity. And there are 3 areas, especially in all of our abundance courses, we talk about 3 areas. I'm going to take a little liberty with some of them, but that we are generous with our time. How can you be more generous with your time? How can you be more generous with your time for yourself, to nurture yourself, to love yourself? By the way, look at how wonderful it is when in the midst of that lack and limitation of saying we don't have enough time in life, that we can prioritize the way in which we use our time and are generous with our time. And so nurturing ourselves, so how can we do that? And how can you be more generous with the people around you with your time? Answering that phone call that sometimes you want to just put down because I don't have enough time to talk to that person right now. Inviting somebody over for dinner that's been asking to connect with you, and you just have been thinking, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time for that. So I am generous with my time. Everybody say that with me. I am generous with my time. Then what about being generous with your talents, your skills, the way that you were beautifully made? Share your talents with others. Don't hide it under the bushel. Don't play it small. Play it large. Be large. Be in the world with everything that you have. You are so beautifully made. We are so beautifully made. And sometimes we just think we have to hide that instead of really shining through. And so seek the ways in which you can be generous with all of the talents that you have. Don't hide them from people. Tell them exactly how you can be generous with those talents. That may have been part of the conversation you were having, Shantae, when you heard about that position at Unity on the Bay, right? Like, share your talents and see the opportunities grow even bigger. And then I am generous with my treasure. Financially, I am generous to give financially, to support Unity on the Bay, to support Give Miami Day, to use your money for the good that you want to see in the world. There are so many organizations and so many ways in which you can use that money that's been entrusted to you to bring heaven on earth. And so I really want to invite you to this practice this week. Now, how many of you have done gratitude lists? Like at the end of the night, you've had some the opportunities to do that? If you're willing, rather than doing the gratitude list, I want us to do a generosity list this week. And so every night before going to bed, write down the ways in which you were generous with time, generous with your talents, and generous with your treasure. Now, I have to tell you that I truly believe that the moment that you do those things, your generosity list, guess what? It becomes the gratitude list. Because the moment that you look at the ways in which you are being generous is the moment that all of a sudden you will be grateful, not only for the practice, but for the way that you were able to show up in the world. Notice how gratitude and generosity are the same and how they support each other. Now, generosity for me is how we can live more fully heaven on earth. And I've shared this quote from Eric Butterworth with you quite a few times, but I just love it because it speaks to who we are in this expression of life. Now, again, it's about tithing, so I took a little liberty with it. But it says, "You are the windows of heaven, and you will be poured out as a blessing. And because you are in the flow of limitless substance by reason of your commitment to generosity, the blessing that you become is more than sufficient to deal with any situation and to meet any and all requirements. You are the windows of heaven. Let heaven be here and now. We are the windows of heaven. Let us open them up. Let us be all that we are meant to be, and let us flow into the world in greater and greater ways. Because why? The world is looking to experience heaven, and they can experience heaven through us." Namaste. Thank you so much. Thank you for visiting our YouTube channel. We post new videos every week to keep you positive, present, and inspired to your divinity. So now please click on the subscribe button below and hit the notification bell. Remember to share this with your friends and family. We love you, we behold the Christ in you, and we see you doing great things.